A lot has been going on since the Building and Development Control Committee published its first draft land use plan in July 2017. The object of this video is to give the key actors the opportunity to bring you up to date with the developments following the public inquiry and subsequent inspector's report.
The 2014 ARUP review of the planning system identified the need for a properly evidenced policy base for the adjudication of planning applications on clear guidelines in order that we move away from ad hoc decision making. This realisation was very similar to that made by the Guernsey Planning Department some years ago, who identified the need for clear policy to protect itself from legal challenge to its decisions. So after extensive discussion with the law officers and with ARUP, we decided that the land use plan process would be the best vehicle to address these issues. So this final document, this final land use plan, consolidates planning policy in a wide range of different areas, and it leads to the first complete, comprehensive and integrated land use plan for Alderney.
We've arrived where we are through a evidence-based gathering process of looking at what's there, involving stakeholders in a discussion about what the future of the island should be, and now we've really got a blueprint, whether it be the land use plan policies or the law processes to get us to where we want to be.
Clearly you feel it's the way forward.
Absolutely, and I think this is something that Alderney can and should be proud of.
Roland, why is it so important that we maintain the designated area, better known as the Green Belt?
Alderney's green belt is rather unique in the Channel Islands. We have a green belt, and the island has a very centralised community. There are only about 60 or 70 homes outside of the town and harbour area, which is very unusual by Channel Island standards. So our countryside is largely undeveloped in sense of we don't have a lot of domestic dwellings, and we have relatively little industry, and really it's only agriculture within our greenbelt area. This is something that comes from prehistory almost. Certainly through the 9th century onwards, we've run an agricultural system all the way up to the Second World War, which created a dense concentration of town area and a very open countryside without the hedge boundaries and the linear development you're familiar with in other Channel Islands. Post-war, the community decided to make a very draconian and a very strong decision to give very heavy protection to the Greenbelt, which did not allow any new development except for a very minor number of specific types of development within the designated or Greenbelt area. And this was in 1975. So over 40 years ago, that decision to give it huge levels of protection came into play, accepting that the states could remove areas from the designated area, and this has happened. We won't argue that. Over time, areas have been removed and developments have been allowed. We should also recognise that over time the states did not necessarily defend take the legal status entirely as it should have been taken, and allowed for developments to take place in the Greenbelt. Since the beginning of the land use plan process at the end of the 1990s, that has been taken much more seriously, and we recognise the need to consolidate the land use plan and the law. But the community as a whole is very strongly of a belief that the Greenbelt is something of real value.
Kieran, can the people of Alderney have confidence in the planning inquiry?
I think a real success from 2016 and 2017 is actually that we've had 2 land use plan inquiries with 2 different inspectors, and we've shown the independence, the impartiality, and the way in which the public can really participate in the process of making planning work.
John, please summarise the key issues raised by the public inquiry, together with the inspector's recommendation.
Well, of course, we had 2 inquiries. The last one was really comprehensive. We had 7 full days of inquiry. He examined about 50 policies. He did 2 things. He picked up an awful lot of detail. His report identified changes that should be made in many of those policies, in the wording of them for strict accuracy, and that was very impressive indeed. But as well as that, he also focused in on a few areas where he considered the committee's recommendation and didn't support them. First of them concerned the Bray Opportunity Area. The committee wanted to confine that area to the west of Bray Bay. So, for example, that a marina would only go in that location. Previously, there'd been openness, preparedness that it should also maybe look at the east side. The inspector wasn't convinced, and he said that it should stay as is, and the committee have accepted that recommendation. The inspector also made a lot of clarifications and changes on natural environment policy, where he looked at the fine wording of the work done by the Wildlife Trust and corrected the draft policies. And in the last area, he identified major changes to heritage policies. And we did a lot of work listing around 400 properties which we thought during the plan were worthy of policies in place to protect them. Unfortunately, the inspector didn't support that, and he said that part should be removed, but we haven't lost that altogether from the plan. Those World War II sites and all those heritage assets that aren't currently listed, we've put them in the strategy documents, so we think that work is still useful for the people of Alderney. The most important one, of course, was Policy S7. This was probably the major policy issue at the inquiry, the major projects policy. Where it was a difficult issue for the inspector because he had a mixture of law issues and policy issues to deal with, and he listened at great length to the concerns of people who were worried that the policy was somehow a weakening of the designated area. The inspector, he supported the committee's approach, but he did try to find ways of enabling a planning inquiry to happen on such applications, and he suggested we might do that by rewording the policies. Subsequent to his report, we found out that didn't work. Legal advice was that wouldn't succeed, and so therefore the committee has decided to solve that issue, achieve the same objective by changing the law.
Could the plan be seen as a licence for the commercial exploitation of Alderney?
I understand that some people see it like that, but I see it differently. So I see the land use plan providing tools and a framework to enable the islanders and the politicians to make better decisions about what they want in the future.
Roland, until recently you've been strongly critical of certain aspects of the land use plan, particularly those relating to the designated area. What's changed your mind?
Well, firstly, I'd like to qualify, when we speak about me, it is the Alderney Society and the Alderney Wildlife Trust who have been working collaboratively to respond to the issues that we've found. And also I'd like to state that generally the Wildlife Trust and the Alderney Society have been very supportive of the land use plan process and have been an active part of the land use plan process up until the conclusion of the report writing stage before it went off to the planning inspector. We believe that the evidence-based approach that this land use plan has taken is highly appropriate. However, there are certain sections, specifically the S7 element relating to major developments in the Greenbelt, that we had concerns over when it came out in the final iteration of the land use plan draft. And more importantly, it was the approach made during the summer to run a parallel process of legal change which would allow for the S7 and also updating of other aspects of the law to go alongside the land use planning process. We do not object to the overall legal change, really outside of the S7 component. And what we needed to do at the time of this being issued, which was back in July of 2017, was seek legal advice. And based on that legal advice and our concerns that this was a rather poorly described way of introducing new abilities to allow for development within the Greenbelt, we raised, as you said, strong concerns.
Tell me, what aspects of the draft land use plan made policy S7 such a contentious issue?
Well, obviously it concerned the designated area, and this is fundamental to Alderney. But I think what the plan recognises is that there are things that need to go on in the designated area. For example, people's houses, the need for adaptations and changes for ordinary life. And there are many buildings in the designated area. And there are uses which committee policies would favour. But of course those uses do not include creation of new residences, either constructed or conversion or change of use. The ban on that use remains. And of course there are many other common sense, historic things that have happened in the past. Things like, for example, memorial benches. and indeed animal shelters, field shelters, and in fact the Alderney Railway, where all those things have gone on in the designated area, but without policies. There was another very significant change that the committee sought to remove the exemptions that the states currently have from the need to make planning applications, the exemptions that the states have that they can do development, and also the public utilities. Obviously, if the law is changed to take that away, there needs also to be policies against which their major projects will be judged. Not the ordinary day-to-day works, we've dealt with exemptions for that, but the big stuff that the states or public utilities might wish to do in the future.
How can an inspector judge what developments are in the public interest?
I think the first key thing is it needs to be long-term public benefit, and we recognise that could take many forms. So it could be about the safety or the security of the island, or also could be projects that promote and support the economic or social well-being of the island.
Are you able to assure islanders that the island's green belt is in safe hands?
Well, there's been significant concern raised by the public that proposed amendments to the law are somehow weakening the designated area. But this is a misconception. The proposed changes involve normalising what have been standard practice in the operation of the designated area since it was formed. It also amends areas of the law that have clearly been oversights from its original intentions. An example would be the Alderney Railway wasn't mentioned. And it finally puts into place clear processes by which major intrusions into the designated area could be judged when it's in the island's overwhelming interest to do so. Very importantly, the removal of the state's blanket exemption from the planning process to development, both in the building and the designated area, is also significant. It will force the states to act as a responsible developer, making decisions on proposed developments through proper process based on best practice.
Is the current plan and law fit for purpose? And how does the current plan compare with elsewhere?
So the current plan that we're proposing and consulting on at the moment really is a step change in policy for Alderney. It will be fit for purpose, and it will compare very favourably, I think, internationally to other plans elsewhere.
Tell me, why have the BDCC proposed a new land use plan and law changes at the same time?
It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, and I think what we need to try and do is go from an old planning system to a new planning system, and in doing so that's the law change and that's the land use plan change.
Tell me, do they depend on each other, and if so, why?
So they are heavily interrelated. The law sets up a very high status for the land use plan, and in the law is what is like the operating system, and the land use plan is the software. They need to run at the same time.
Chloe, can the land use plan be approved without making the necessary changes to the law? In other words, is it possible to cherry pick certain elements?
No, I mean the land use plan and the law have been developed together, and they work in harmony, so that's all part of a package. So if you say no to one part, you're saying no to the other parts.
John, talk me through these procedural changes.
Well, you can see on the first chart how slim the current procedure is. There are no safeguards in there at all. Under the new procedure, the second chart, it talks about a planning inquiry, and you can see on the third chart that in certain circumstances that inquiry must happen. And of course that inquiry does not replace the present procedure for an inquiry into land use plan changes. That's an additional inquiry into an application. And the fourth chart sets out the minimum requirement which will bind on the Policy and Finance Committee if ever they propose an exception. And those are minimum requirements, and those are quite stringent.
Is the new land use plan likely to have any positive benefits on the island's economy and or other aspects of island life?
Well, in my view, this document will help developers. It gives them clear guidance on what the planning department expects from them, rather than on the variable opinions of the politicians of the day. That means that planning should become a simpler process, and that in itself will help inward investment into the island. But also it helps discourage cowboy, ill-considered knee-jerk development to which the island's been prone for many years. And new development must be balanced with the need to conserve our environment and our heritage. That's not only central to our tourist economy, but it's also to the quality of life of the residents. Now, for the first time, Estates Planning will have robust policy to deal with the island's heritage assets and a baseline study on the island's natural environment to help it make assessments of what is special about the island's ecosystems. These pieces of the plan are of huge significance and put in place really solid foundations that can be built upon in the future. And certainly I would like to express my thanks to the Alderney Society and the Wildlife Trust and all those really committed individuals who have contributed to that part of the process.
The Alderney Society and Wildlife Trust believe that this land use plan iteration is by far the best of any of the recent attempts to draft land use planning. It is evidence-based. It attempts to assess the environment of the island as a whole and set standards by which we should continue to judge that environment and consider development against. So generally we believe that the land use plan is a real sensible move forward. However, it needs to be formally consolidated with the law. One of our main principal concerns is the need to see the States of Alderney consolidate the law and bring it all up to date under a new consolidated planning law at the earliest possible opportunity. That will enable us to deal with issues such as appeals, which is a major issue requiring law change, but it also means that the law is fundamentally altered by a projet de loi, a law, rather than via ordinance, and that is what we'd like to see happening as soon as this land use plan process is completed.
John, are there any loose ends that still need to be resolved?
Well, yes, I think we recognise at the outset that once the plan had been completed, this would be the time at which the planning appeal system should be reviewed. In other jurisdictions, in Jersey and Guernsey and the UK for many years, planning appeals are dealt with by planning inspectors, and planning inspectors review decisions against land use plan policies. If the states approve the policies, then there's the opportunity to change that system and change the Alderney court for a planning inspection-led system. There's a ready-made model that the committee have identified in Guernsey, and there is an opportunity, with agreement of everybody, to look at adapting the Guernsey system to Alderney. That's one area. The other one is in the area of very, very special wildlife sites. This is the equivalent of SSI designations. That exists in Jersey and Guernsey and other places and in the UK, and that is an element that is missing. We do have policies in the land use plan, but of course those policies need to be backed up for the very, very special places where we've got international habitats, international species of importance. But these are all things which I suppose this committee or a future committee can pick up upon, and there are very, very strong reasons for doing so. I think that can lead to future opportunities for the benefit of both tourism and promotion of Alderney by doing those things.
Can Alderney cope with the new plan and the associated legislation? Is it unduly complicated?
I think that's a really good question, and that's because the more complicated something is for planning, actually the greater power, the greater confidence you can have in it. The more specific and the more detailed something is, that means you have greater consistency, greater clarity, and when you're making decisions, you've got more prompts to help you make those decisions.
The land use plan has actually got meat on its bones now, whereas before it was very thin and not very, not very defined. Now I feel like we have a process put in place for pretty much every eventuality, no matter how big or small. So I don't think it's complicated. In fact, it's going to be my Bible, and it's what I will be helping to judge all the applications by. It's going to definitely help. I can't see how people would think it's complicated because you're obviously not reading it as a whole. It's like a lot of books, you go into which section you need, and I can always help, if people don't know what they're doing, so I'm always here. I wouldn't say it was complicated in any way, no.
In your own words, why would you recommend this to the population of Alderney?
I would recommend the land use plan to everyone in Alderney as it's really the means by which Alderney makes sure it's got all the tools in the toolbox it needs now and for the future.
The legislation, particularly in relation to major projects, which I know has been a focus of community concern, compares really favourably. There are really strong checks and balances in place which ensure the right decisions are made.
I've been involved with island plan formulation in Jersey on 2 occasions, and of course having worked for Guernsey for a period, I can see the differences with their plan. I think the Alderney plan is a level above. It's got some very, very progressive but very clear and simple concepts in it. And I think it's really an excellent model for other jurisdictions to follow.
I think we have a fantastic document that really takes the island forward for the next 20 years. It's something that we can be really proud of and sets the island up for the 21st century.